Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, understanding the contempt of Parliament and the power of parliamentary resolutions. The Committee of Parliament on Rules, Discipline and Privileges continues with its task of trying to establish whether Prime Minister Asuman Basalirwa and Minister Hilary Onek are guilty of contempt of Parliament for failing to step aside. The two appeared before this committee last week and indicated they would not step aside because they said the resolution of Parliament is not binding and that there is no offence under the Ugandan law known as contempt of Parliament. Yesterday, Attorney General Peter Nyombi presented his position on the matter, reaffirming the positions of the two ministers, although he went ahead to add that Parliament has no power to ask ministers to vacate office. His argument is based on the idea that only the president who appoints can disappoint, and that anyone who tries to push ministers out of office is acting outside of the law. He also argued that under the Ugandan law, stepping aside is not defined and that it's not provided for as one of the ways that a minister can vacate office. Today, former Supreme Court Judge George Wilson Kenyahamba appeared before the committee and indicated that resolutions of Parliament are binding and that anyone who opposes them is defiant to the August House and thus must be expelled. Pardon me. Kenyahamba also indicated that since Parliament has powers to approve or disapprove of ministers, it therefore has the powers to push them out as members of Parliament or even as appointed ministers. Some political circles have intimated that whatever is going on in Parliament could be politically motivated, and Minister Hilary Onek was not shy to state that the opposition approached him requesting him to step aside so that Asuman Basalirwa, the Prime Minister, can be isolated. So tonight we seek the opinion of two lawyers who are also political minds to try and understand their view about contempt of Parliament and the notion that this could be a political fight centered at Parliament. Our guests tonight, Honorable Asuman Basalirwa, President of the JEEMA Party, also a practicing lawyer at Kamba Co Advocates. He's a partner in that law firm. You're most welcome, Mr. Basalirwa.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond, and good evening, all our listeners.
We're also joined on the line by Mr. Joseph Luzige, legal officer in charge of special duties in the President's office, also from the Luzige-Kamya Co Advocates legal firm. You're most welcome, Mr. Luzige.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Basalirwa, right. Mr. Basalirwa, can you define for us contempt of Parliament? What exactly is it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Edmond. One, I wish to associate myself with the submission of the Attorney General that in our laws, even under the parliamentary rules and procedures, contempt of Parliament is not defined. It is silent, actually. We have contempt of court. We don't have contempt of Parliament. When we talk about contempt of Parliament, what do we mean? I'll give you an example. We have jurisdictions in the world where their legal frameworks define what contempt of Parliament is. Australia, for example, has the Parliamentary Privileges Act.
Okay, I'll interrupt you very briefly. Can I ask you, Honorable Luzige, to lower the volume on your radio? We're getting a feedback from there. All right.
Is that fine?
All right. Go on, Honorable Basalirwa.
Yes, I was explaining that there are two scenarios when you are discussing contempt of Parliament. One scenario is where a country's legal framework specifically defines what contempt of Parliament is. In Commonwealth jurisdictions, you have countries like Australia, which has the Parliamentary Privileges Act. It specifically defines what contempt of Parliament is, and it actually makes it an offense. You have countries like Canada, the Constitutional Act defines it. You have countries like Hong Kong. Specifically, their legal frameworks define what contempt of Parliament is. Now, in our country, Uganda, we don't have a specific law that defines what contempt of Parliament is. Now, while there is no specific law, Parliament is mandated by way of resolution to regard any act or omission as contempt. So it's not out of the ordinary, it is not strange for Parliament through a resolution to state that a certain act or omission amounts to contempt of Parliament. Because the word contempt is an English word. You are talking about disrespecting or disobeying laws, regulations, could even be decorum of public authority.
Right.
So it is not true that where there is no specific law, Parliament cannot decide or cannot resolve on an act or omission as amounting to contempt. As a matter of fact, when you look at our Constitution, Article 28, it will tell you that with the exception of contempt of court, nobody can be charged for an offense that is not written and whose penalty is not prescribed. But what is contempt of court? A very, very, very broad aspect. I'll tell you that now if you went to court and your phone rang, you can be charged for contempt of court. But when that concept was being introduced very many years ago, there were no mobile phones.
Yes, go on.
So the purview, the range, the contours of contempt are very broad. So the Attorney General cannot in any way dismiss a resolution of Parliament to the effect that what the ministers are doing does not amount to contempt of Parliament.
So you're saying specifically the law does not exist, but even though there is a gap,
Yes.
Parliament has the powers as the legislative arm of government
Yes.
to pass a resolution.
Yes.
Well, but they've said some resolutions are binding, others are simply advisory, and they can be ignored.
Well, I have told you on this show before, Parliament speaks through resolutions. And a resolution is actually a legal document, enforceable and binding on all institutions to whom it is addressed. So Parliament cannot make a resolution as a fashion statement, as a cosmetic show. It makes a resolution to achieve a purpose. And Parliament enjoys what we call parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament can do and can also undo any law in this country by virtue of Article 79. Parliament has parliamentary committees, even have powers of the High Court and Article 90 of our Constitution. So a parliamentary resolution is a very fundamental practice. It's a very fundamental procedure which cannot in any way be undermined. As a matter of fact, if anybody fails to implement, if anybody dishonors a parliamentary resolution, then that action or that omission can in itself amount to contempt in its connotative or denotative meaning.
Right.
Contempt. So I think what should really be noted is that when we are talking about contempt, we are talking about deliberately disobeying or disregarding. So the Parliament, under its enormous mandate provided in Article 79 of our Constitution, can regard any action or omission as being contempt. Otherwise, parliamentary resolutions will be meaningless. They will be useless.
They would be ignored even by village
by anybody in this country. And you know, I have told you that Parliament speaks through resolutions.
Right.
If the President, for example, wants to declare war,
yes,
on a country,
right,
there must be a resolution of what? A resolution of Parliament. Yes. If there is need to borrow money,
Parliament has to approve of that.
Parliament has to approve.
Okay.
And how do they approve?
Through a resolution.
Through a resolution.
All right.
So resolutions are legal documents, and they are binding in their nature. So with or without, in fact, in parliamentary democracies, you talk about two things.
Yes.
Either there is a specific law defining what contempt of Parliament is,
right,
or in the absence of that specific law, then Parliament under parliamentary sovereignty can, through a resolution,
right,
declare an act to be in contempt.
This is Spectrum on Radio 1 tonight, understanding contempt of Parliament and the power of parliamentary resolutions. Our guests tonight, Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, President of the JEEMA Party, also a practicing lawyer. He's a partner there at Kamba Co Advocates. We are also joined on the line by Mr. Joseph Luzige, legal officer in charge of special duties in the President's office, also partner in the Luzige-Kamya Co Advocates legal firm. You're welcome once again, Mr. Luzige.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Edmond.
What's your response to this? The minister should really be stepping aside.
First of all, I just want to inform the public. There are times when some of us give our legal opinion, they tend to give us a political leaning. First of all, I would like to agree with Mr. Basalirwa in as far as he argues that there is no clear definition of contempt of court. However, does not talk about contempt of court in Uganda. But I beg to disagree with him when he comes up, when he argues that resolutions of parliament are binding. First of all, I wish to associate myself. There was an article which was written by a certain lawyer. I've forgotten his name, but I think as we go along in the program, I'll be in position to remember. I think Parliament made a mistake. First of all, when Mr. Basalirwa talks about sovereignty of Parliament, he's talking about separation of powers. First of all, when you look at the ministers who are being referred to, Asuman Basalirwa and the others, these are people who are appointed by the president. And when he talks about sovereignty of Parliament, automatically, as I've earlier on said, what comes into play is the separation of powers. Now, Parliament can, in its own jurisdiction, recommend that certain ministers be disciplined to the president. But Parliament cannot actually come up with a resolution saying that the minister should step aside because it has no powers. He has been saying that parliamentary resolutions are binding. Unfortunately, I've not been actually getting him clearly since I'm online and where I am, the network may not be so clear. But one thing Mr. Basalirwa has to understand that even Parliament's resolutions are not final. Parliament cannot come up and make a resolution, for instance, let's say pass a law which is unconstitutional. The resolution which Parliament, at this, in respect to these other ministers made, I think is a bit unconstitutional and can be challenged in the Constitutional Court. There are so many laws which Parliament have made which have been challenged. I do agree with him that there is no clear, in our laws, there is no clear, especially in parliamentary rules and procedures, there is no clear definition of what amounts to contempt of Parliament. That is why Parliament, which, by the way, the audience must understand, those who are listening into this program must understand that there are so many lawyers in Parliament, good brains. They realize that they are going to make a mistake and decided to refer the matter to its committee, which is in charge of rules and procedures in Parliament. That is an indication that they are alive to the fact that there is a mistake which was made. I do entirely agree. I'm not in support of whatever is going on. Of course, I don't condone. I don't actually say that Parliament should investigate corruption. It should, because those are some of the reasons and ideas which the NRM government must actually undertake to achieve. So I don't want the people who are listening to the program to imagine and say that he's saying that because of ABCD. But legally speaking, there is a problem. That is why when most of these ministers were referred to go back to that, to go and appear before that committee, the committee had to tell some of its members to disqualify themselves. Another issue which I want Mr. Basalirwa to look at, these are people who are being told to go before a committee which is acting on a resolution which said they should step aside. Now, what are they going to do before the committee? They're already convicted, and the cardinal principle of law that you cannot be a judge, a prosecutor, at the same time and accused in the same office. So I think there is a big problem which has to be addressed.
Honorable Basalirwa.
Yes.
Well, he's made his point very clear.
Yes. Number one, I'll begin with where he makes reference to the concept of separation of powers. As a matter of fact, in a country like Uganda, you cannot talk about separation of powers. You can only talk about fusion, because cabinet is virtually derived. Some members of cabinet are derived from the legislature. The members, judges of the High Court, Court of Appeal and Supreme Court are appointed by the President, approved by Parliament. You are talking about executive members also exercising legislative powers.
Yes.
So there is nothing like total separation of powers in the case of Uganda. In fact, this doctrine of separation of powers, as you are aware, was espoused by this French philosopher, Baron de Montesquieu. And for him, he was thinking about complete separation. And he thought that was the model which was obtaining in Britain, which was not the case. Because in Britain, until recently, they have a fusion. So even in this country, Uganda, you can only talk about fusion. There is no absolute or total separation of powers. So I wanted that, I think the public to be very clear on that. Number two, there is nothing unconstitutional about Parliament making a resolution calling upon ministers to step aside, and two, failure to step aside, taking them to be in contempt. Otherwise, what would be the sanction for anybody who disregards parliamentary resolutions? If you defy a parliamentary resolution, then how do we describe you?
Well, but still, on the issue of the technicality,
yes,
do they really have the force of law?
To do what?
Well, to recommend to the executive certain actions. Actually, give us some parallels there, like passing the budget and appointing. Why exactly? Because Justice Kenyahamba was saying that if they need to appoint, Parliament needs to approve of executive appointment.
Yes. Yes.
Then they should have the power to sack them. Is that a ruling that?
No, it's talking about a non-cardinal principle. One who has powers of appointment has powers of disappointment. One who has powers of approval has powers of disapproval. And what Professor Kenyahamba is saying, if Parliament actually approves ministers, then you cannot, the ministers can also be disapproved by the same Parliament. So you cannot say that Parliament only has one role in as far as ministerial duties and appointments are concerned of approval, and cannot exercise any other role. The issue is that the Parliament still maintains a role. Now, whether it is explicit or implicit, that's an issue for discussion. And as I said, Parliament speaks through resolutions. Parliament, like any other corporate body, you have companies. Companies speak through resolutions. If they want to, for example, open an account, they will have a resolution from board meetings or shareholders meetings.
Yes.
If they want to change a name, they will have resolutions, and that's how Parliament operates. Formal decisions of Parliament are undertaken through parliamentary resolutions. So a parliamentary resolution has the legal efficacy in whatever form.
Right.
A parliamentary resolution and where it is directory in nature, it will say so.
Right.
Where it commands, it will also say so. In this respect, the parliamentary resolution was saying the ministers should step aside. Okay? So if the ministers fail, under the guise,
they are in contempt of Parliament.
under the guise that it's only the president who appointed them who can revoke the instrument of appointment as provided for under Article 108A of the Constitution and Article 116 of the Constitution. In my view, that would be an erroneous interpretation of the law. So you cannot take parliamentary resolutions for a joke. Because Parliament is a supreme law-making organ under Article 79.
Yes.
Parliament plays an oversight role.
True.
Now, in its oversight role, it can resolve that a certain minister or the actions of a certain minister or the omissions of a certain minister are in contempt. Okay. And by the way, in other jurisdictions, contempt has very stringent sanctions.
Yes.
In Britain in 1964, an MP had to be expelled from Parliament for being in contempt.
Right.
So when you are talking about contempt, broadly speaking, you are talking about when either you are disregarding a resolution, you are frustrating or jeopardizing parliamentary work,
yes,
you are even bribing or influencing or threatening MPs in the performance of their function. All those actions in jurisdictions where contempt of Parliament is defined,
yes,
those are some of the parameters. Right. But as I told you, it's open-ended. You cannot create boundaries. You cannot create contours around the definition of contempt or the parameters of contempt.
This is Spectrum on Radio 1. We're going for a break, but we'll be right back.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were support coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also help friends seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He is just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
The energy god, Alpha Man from Jamaica, is gonna rock a party in the course of down. Let's get physical!
No linger.
Elephant Man is gonna rock hella air on Friday 2nd Dash 2011 and the Go-Go Cricket Over at 25k ordinary and 75k VIP. Gets open at 6 p.m. Introducing the energy god, Elephant Man! Elephant Jams! Elephant Man is gonna surprise KLIR with 2 surprise DJs. And now, ladies and gentlemen, there's no other ad for this. You has to be there!
Yep. Good to go.
Elephant Man in Uganda is brought to you by Kamba Co Property Consultants. Challenge the tours and travel. The Red Pepper. Spend Alpha. Don't wish you are there. Be there. Excessive consumption of alcohol is harmful to your health. Strictly not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly. And clap, shook.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband Company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer 0 connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111.
Broadband Company, more than you expect.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum. Tonight, understanding contempt of Parliament and the power of parliamentary resolutions. Our guests tonight, Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, President of the JEEMA Party, also practicing lawyer at Kamba Company Advocates, where he is a partner. Our second guest is Mr. Joseph Luzige, legal officer in charge of special duties in the President's office, also from the Luzige-Kamya Company Advocates legal firm. You'll be able to call in and contribute to this discussion. Right now, let's hear from Mr. Luzige. Mr. Luzige is with us on the line. The line has broken, but we are trying to get back to him. He was with us in the first half. We expect him to be with us even now. Mr. Basalirwa, what is likely to happen looking at the dynamics?
Well, I foresee a constitutional crisis arising out of this scenario. And Parliament exercising its powers, the executive failing to respect, or some members of the executive deliberately refusing or disobeying powers of Parliament. So there is likely to be a constitutional crisis. There is likely to be paralysis, and a bad precedent is going to be set in this country, where Parliament will not be taken seriously for the present and the future.
Let's hear from Mr. Luzige. Is that something that you agree with? Constitutional crisis. What do you think?
I don't really agree with it. It's very unfortunate that the network is not so clear, and I'm not in the studios. I would have loved really to sit next to Mr. Basalirwa. First of all, there's no constitutional crisis. And I don't think there is really a cause for alarm. Like I earlier on said, Parliament, yes, I agree with him. Parliament can make and has to make resolutions which have to be binding. But those resolutions must be legal. And like I earlier on said, if Parliament